So under Roosevelt and Wilson, and to a lesser extent Taft, progressivism flourished domestically, but it also became an international phenomenon as presidents expanded national government power outside the country's border, mostly in the Western Hemisphere. Like between 1901 and 1920, U.S. Marines landed in Caribbean countries over 20 times, usually to create a more friendly environment for American businesses, but sometimes just to hang out on the beach. And this points to an interesting contradiction. Progressive presidents were very concerned about big business as a threat to freedom in the United States. But in Latin America and the Caribbean, they weren't that concerned about freedom at all. Teddy Roosevelt especially was much more active in international diplomacy than his predecessors. He was the first president to win the Nobel Peace Prize, for instance, for helping to negotiate the Treaty of Portsmouth that ended the Russo-Japanese War in 1905. You may be familiar with his motto, "Speak softly and carry a big stick," which essentially meant the U.S. will intervene in Latin America whenever we want. And probably the most famous such intervention was the building of the Panama Canal. It featured feats of engineering and succeeding where the French had failed. Stan, these are my favorite things! Let's go to the thought bubble. The way we got the 10-mile wide canal zone wasn't so awesome. In 1903, Panama was part of Colombia, but the U.S. encouraged Felipe Benalveria to lead an uprising. Benalveria, a representative of the Panama Canal Company, was so grateful after the U.S. sent a gunboat to ensure that the Colombian army couldn't stop him that he signed a treaty giving the U.S. the right to build and operate the canal and sovereignty over newly independent Panama's canal zone, which we gave up in 2000 after enjoying nearly 100 years of sovereignty thanks to Jimmy Carter's stupid altruism. Roosevelt also added the Roosevelt Corollary to the Monroe Doctrine, the 1823 statement that the U.S. would defend independent Latin American states from European intervention. Now, according to Roosevelt, we would wield our big stick like a policeman waving around a nightstick exercising an international police power over the Western Hemisphere. In practice, this meant using American troops to ensure that Latin American countries were stable enough for Americans to invest there. Like in 1904, we seized the Customs House in the Dominican Republic to make sure that they paid their debts to investors. Then, by executive agreement, American banks got control of the DR's finances. Roosevelt also encouraged investment by the United Fruit Company in Honduras and Costa Rica, helping to turn those nations into banana republics. No, not the store thought bubble. Yes. Taft, on the other hand, maybe because of his experiences as governor of the Philippines, was less eager to wave America's big stick. He emphasized loans and economic investment as the best way to spread American influence in a policy that came to be known as dollar diplomacy. Ultimately, dollar diplomacy was probably more effective, but it seemed weak to many people in contrast to Roosevelt's strategy of send all the troops right now! Thanks, Thought Bubble. I wore my Banana Republic shirt just for this occasion. So we've discussed Roosevelt and Taft's foreign policy. Let's move on to Wilson, who was of course an isolationist. No, Woodrow Wilson, okay. Woodrow Wilson was not a volleyball. He was the son of a Presbyterian minister, a former American history professor, and once had been governor of New Jersey, so he understood moral indecency. Wilson thought the best way to teach other countries about the greatness of America was to export colossal amounts of American products. Like in 1916, he instructed a group of businessmen, sell goods that will make the world more comfortable and happy and convert them to the principles of America. In short, Woodrow Wilson believed correctly that the essence of democracy is the freedom to choose among hundreds of brightly colored breakfast cereals. Still, Wilson intervened in Latin America more than any other U.S. president, and his greatest moral triumph was in Mexico, where he wanted to teach the Mexicans, quote, to elect good men. To do this, Wilson sent troops to stop weapons from flowing to the military dictator Victoriano Huerta, but the Americans who landed at Veracruz were not welcomed with open arms, and 100 Mexicans and 19 Americans were killed. And then in 1916, having learned his lesson, just kidding, Wilson sent 10,000 troops into northern Mexico to chase after revolutionary bandit Pancho Villa. Villa had killed 17 Americans in New Mexico, and everyone knows that the proper response to such a criminal act is to send 10,000 troops into a foreign country. Pershing's expedition was a smashing success, fortunately, except that he actually did not capture Pancho Villa. But all of that was a prelude to Wilson's leading America to our first international moral crusade, our involvement in the Great War. So this period of American history is important because Roosevelt, Taft, and Wilson oversaw the expansion of the power of the federal government, both at home and abroad, and in doing so, they became the first modern American presidents. I mean, these days we might talk about small government and large government, but really, we're always talking about large government. Roosevelt, Taft, and Wilson recognized that the national government was going to have to deal with big business, and that it would have to get big to do that, and also that it had a role to play in ensuring that Americans would retain some freedom in this new industrial era. And they also built built neo-imperialistic foreign policies around the idea that the safer the world was for American business, the better it was for Americans. As our old friend Eric Foner wrote, the presidents who spoke the most about freedom were likely to intervene most frequently in the affairs of other countries. Sometimes for good and sometimes for ill. We'll see an extreme and ambiguous case of that next week when we look at America in World War I. Thanks for watching. I'll see you then. Crash Course is produced and directed by Stan Muller. Our script supervisor is Meredith Danko. The associate producer is Danica Johnson. Our show is written by my high school history teacher, Raul Meyer, Rosiana Rojas, and myself, and our graphics team is Thought Cafe. Every week there's a new caption for the Libertage. If you'd like to suggest one, you can do so in comments, where you can also ask questions about today's video that will be answered by our team of historians. Thanks for watching Crash Course, and as we say in my hometown, don't forget to be awesome.